I'm actually pretty lucky to sit here in Scarman House on Warwick campus and have some tea with one of the greatest Irish contemporary writers, Colm Tóibín. Colm, nice to have you here. Whenever I think of authors, to be honest, it's exactly this kind of atmosphere, having some tea, sitting in a comfortable atmosphere. Is this how it is when you write stories?
I think you can write anywhere, really, but you know, the less comfort, the better. Sometimes, you know, that you really do need to create quite a lot of tension in what you do, and you're sort of dredging things up, so that a hard chair is better than a soft chair, and that you're often better to start in the morning before you wash yourself or check emails, and produce a paragraph, and then at least you've got that done. But the real enemy is laziness and comfort, I suppose.
I can imagine that you inform yourself in the morning about the world happenings. Do you read the newspaper, or do you listen to the radio, or do you watch TV news?
I never watch TV news. I might in the evening, but I would never turn on the TV in the day. I think I'm of that generation where there simply wasn't TV in the day, so I never got used to it. Yeah, but I would wake up to the news. But the effort is to try and write something before I go out, or before the newspaper starts, or before I turn on. I mean, I work in longhand, so before I turn on the computer.
Colm, let us talk about your most recent novel, Brooklyn, that you just presented at the University of Warwick. It won the Costa Novel Award last year, and just to summarize the story, it's about the Irish woman Eilish, who emigrates to Brooklyn in the early 1950s. And she's offered a new job, she falls in love with an Italian man and with her new life in America itself. But on the other hand, she seems to be kind of torn between her Irish roots and her new life. So what exactly is this feeling of Irishness? What draws her back home?
I didn't think it was Irishness as much as a few streets in a small town, her family. And that it was very specific things, rather than some overall idea, for example, of patriotism or a large country or even a small country, that it was very much to do with family rather than with fatherland.
I know that you don't really like focusing on the Irishness of characters, as you just said, but I have to say, I personally believe that you can still feel a certain sense of Irish identity through your stories and through your characters, more in a subtle way.
Yeah, I mean, Borges said there are no camels mentioned in the Koran, and you could really deduce from this there were no camels at that time in that place, but he said there were so many camels that nobody bothered mentioning them. They didn't need to be mentioned.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of things like that, you know, in other words, yes, it clearly is Ireland. She clearly does have an Irish accent. She clearly is aware of her nationality, but you don't need to mention that. I think if you're a novelist, you've got to be very careful with that. That the details are interesting, but the large questions are not.
I mean, there is this huge debate going on that when writers write on Irish topics, they somehow have to derive from this country itself. What would you say about it?
I'm not sure, but I know what you mean by Irish topics, you know.
About Irish,
Characters.
Irish characters, Irish identity.
Well, I'm not sure I know what you mean by identity. The word identity doesn't mean much to me. A national identity. I'm much more interested in what was the weather like that morning?
Oh, okay.
How did you cross the street? Were the traffic lights red or green? I think they're more interesting questions.
So more the personal kind
Well,
of experience.
I think if you're working, you work in detail.
Yeah. All right.
And I think if you work not in that way, there's a sort of laziness develops. Like you get up in the morning, does anyone get up in the morning and think about their national identity?
Not
you know, as
really.
they're washing themselves?
That's
I
true.
don't think so.
I was just thinking, you would probably not write about non-Irish characters.
Oh, I have. In my novel, The Story of the Night, the characters are Anglo-Argentine, and I'm working on a long story at the moment, which the characters are Pakistani. And I think you should be able to imagine anything.
Yeah.
And I've written also stories in which the characters are Catalan.
I mean, in terms of identity, there is another very interesting novel to talk about, which is your very first one, The Self, published in 1990. And It's about an Irish woman, Catherine, who leaves her husband to go to Barcelona in search of a new life, of a new beginning. And she begins to learn a new language, a new culture. And I know that you can also speak Catalan perfectly because you spent many years in Spain. What does it mean for you exactly to speak another language? What does it mean to your characters?
Oh, my Catalan is not really perfect. It should be perfect. And
Well,
I'm very
it's pretty
ashamed.
good.
I'm very ashamed of it sometimes, but it's always a bit of a struggle. But I love being around when Spanish or Catalan are being spoken. I associate the languages with pleasure, with Mediterranean freedom, with colour, and yeah, there's with a sort of excitement.
All right. Catherine in the novel The South, I would describe her as a pretty nonconformist character, like actually many of your other characters who are female, who are women. Where does it come from?
I suppose I was interested in getting some of those cliches, for example, the maternal instinct, and seeing what could be done with it if you started playing with it. Or that women are, whatever word you want to use, you could use 10 words, this is what women are. But then if you have a woman character, having her very tough, or having her not particularly maternal, or having her very independent, those things have a dramatic power that if you sort of play with the cliches, they don't.
Just to come back to the figure of Catherine, because I think she's a really interesting one. I kind of feel that through learning a new language, she kind of develops a new kind of identity as well.
Oh, very much so. I think that with getting out of Ireland into Spain and suddenly discovering love, colour, but also then that she starts to conduct her life in this new language. And obviously that brought her, she almost invented a personality to go along with that new language, only to find, in fact, that the other personality that she had before hadn't changed, had quite solidified in those same years.
So it's a kind of new sense of home as well for her?
Well, a new sense of not home, yeah.
You've worked as a journalist as well in your past, and you have written a lot of non-fictional texts as well. I think what is a common element in your work in general is the ability of close observation, because the reader seems to be confronted with the acute visual images that you kind of describe in a detailed way in your novels. At the same time, I feel that your writing reveals a great sense of myth, of secrecy and silencing as well. How do you combine those two spirits?
I don't think I work with myth very much, and if I do, it's sort of hidden. It's in the background. But certainly with secrecy and silence, I think a novel lends itself to secrecy and silence, where you can actually let the reader know something that the protagonist doesn't know. You can have things happening and then suddenly everybody knowing something. And I think prose, oddly enough, is filled with silence, and the whole business of the ingredient of silence is quite important in a sentence, that there's almost a shadow sentence, which is a silent sentence.
And I kind of feel this element of silence is also a bit connected to the town of Enniscorthy, which is often mentioned in your novels. It's also mentioned in The South. Catherine comes from Enniscorthy, Wexford. What is your personal relationship to this area?
Well, I'm from there and I was brought up there, and therefore it's a sort of topography of the spirit that I can summon up at any moment. I don't live there, so I'm not good at what's happening there now. So it's a sort of almost sort of Proustian business of that with the smell, or even writing down the word, the steeple of the church can conjure up all these emotions, and I can suddenly see a certain day, and I can go back into memory, and I can dredge things up. Whereas if I'd invented a place and put a different name on it, I wouldn't be able to do that.